the allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The decision did not arrive with a public speech or a dramatic palace announcement. It came quietly, in a sealed internal notice, carrying William's authority. And for Meghan, it landed like a personal exile written in official ink. One moment, Windsor still represented history, status, and unfinished royal belonging. The next, her name was removed from a door she believed could never fully close. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Meghan sat with the notice in her hands and read the first line twice, as if the words might soften if she looked at them long enough. They did not. William had cancelled her official access credentials to Windsor Castle's private residences, ending her ability to enter internal guest apartments, family corridors, and residence areas once connected to royal household status. Windsor Castle, the royal fortress and working residence that holds both staterooms and private family spaces, had always represented more than stone walls. For Meghan, it meant recognition. For Harry, it meant a final link to the family world he had walked away from, but never fully stopped needing. And now that link had been cut with cold precision. Harry watched her lower the paper, and something in her face changed. Shock became humiliation. Humiliation became anger. He knew this was not just about a pass being cancelled, or a name being removed from a security list. Official access credentials are the permissions that allow a person to move through protected royal areas, without being treated as an outside visitor, and losing them meant Meghan had been placed beyond the private boundary of Windsor itself. The palace could call it an administrative security correction. Staff could describe it as routine housekeeping. But everyone inside those walls understood the deeper message. Meghan was no longer being treated as someone with standing access to the family's inner world. William's name made the wound sharper. The document carried his direct authorization, not the vague approval of a faceless office or a distant security department. The prince had not allowed the decision to hide behind palace machinery. He had signed it as a boundary. He had turned private concern into formal action. A senior aide then confirmed the blow Meghan feared most. Her name had already been removed from the Residence Access Register before she could appeal. The Residence Access Register is the internal list used to decide who may enter protected living areas. And once Meghan disappeared from it, courtesy could no longer open the door for her. Harry stepped closer, but he did not know what comfort could survive a paper like that. Meghan held the notice tighter, asking why she had been erased before anyone had spoken to her directly. He had no answer that would not sound like surrender. Somewhere inside Windsor, William had made a decision that was already moving through staff desks, security systems, and silent corridors. Yet the deepest wound was not the cancellation itself. It was the question Meghan could not shake. Who had the prince consulted before he signed away her access? And before Meghan can understand why the door has closed, the story turns toward the people standing on either side of it. This was never just about Windsor Castle. It was about Meghan's place, William's authority, and Harry's painful position between the woman he chose and the family he left behind. In one decision, every old wound returned with sharper edges. The palace saw protocol. Meghan saw rejection. Harry saw a final warning, and William saw a boundary that could no longer remain blurred. Meghan understood Windsor in a way the palace could never reduce to a security list. To the public, Windsor Castle was a royal residence, a historic home used by the monarchy for official life and private family moments. But to Meghan, it carried something far more painful. It was legitimacy. It was memory. It was the last visible thread tying her back to a world that had once opened its doors to her with ceremony, expectation, and impossible pressure. Losing access did not feel like losing a convenience. It felt like being told that the private side of royal life had finally moved on without her. Harry felt that message too, and it trapped him. He paced because standing still would have felt like accepting defeat. He was angry at William, furious that the prince had signed a decision that landed so personally on Meghan. Yet beneath that anger sat a truth Harry could not fully push away. Windsor had become a test of loyalty. Not the loud kind spoken in interviews or headlines, but the colder kind written into procedure. Residence protocol, the system that decides who may enter private royal spaces and under what authority, had now become a weapon of belonging. Meghan saw staff faces in her mind, aides whispering, clerks updating files, guards already knowing her name had been removed before she could defend herself. William carried a different burden, and that made the wound more complicated. The prince now stood closer to the future of the crown, responsible not only for image but for order, family boundaries, and the protected spaces tied to the monarchy's next generation. He could not treat Windsor as a place where old emotions decided present access. He had children to consider, a household to guard, and a future role that demanded firmness even when firmness looked cruel. Catherine's name moved quietly behind the decision, not as an attacker, not as a voice demanding punishment, but as the center of a household William was determined to shield from uncertainty. For him, the line was no longer about Meghan alone. It was about what could be allowed near the future. Charles understood the cost before anyone had to explain it. The king read the briefing note alone, resting his hand near the signature line, as if silence might delay consequence. A briefing note is a short official document prepared to explain a decision, its risks, and its expected fallout, and this one gave Charles every reason to intervene. Yet he did not reverse William's action. That refusal said more than a speech. It revealed that the monarch saw the danger in reopening a door the future king had closed. The pain would be Meghan's. The anger would be Harry's. But the authority, unmistakably, belonged to William. And then the older Windsor incident surfaced again, the one nobody wanted to name too loudly. It had been buried beneath politeness, softened by time, and dismissed as another awkward family misunderstanding. But inside palace files, it had not disappeared. It had waited. And now, as Meghan felt the sting of rejection, and Harry felt the pull of divided loyalty, that forgotten moment returned with terrifying force. To understand why William acted now, the story must return to the private moment that turned family tension into an official palace line. Every royal rupture has a moment people later remember differently. Some call it a misunderstanding. Others call it the beginning of the end. For William, the trigger was not a headline or interview, but one tense evening behind Windsor's walls, a reception where Meghan's presence, one private corridor, and one unanswered question changed the temperature inside the family forever. Meghan had arrived at the Windsor Charity Honors reception, believing the evening would prove that old tensions could still be managed with grace. The reception, a formal palace gathering meant to honor public service and charitable work, carried more weight than a simple social event, because it placed former and current royal figures under the same roof, surrounded by staff who understood every gesture. Meghan knew Windsor could either confirm distance or quietly restore dignity. Harry knew it too. That was why every polite smile felt loaded, and every pause carried the threat of judgment. The moment came after the formal part of the evening ended. Meghan requested entry through a private family corridor leading toward the residence rooms, expecting the kind of courtesy that had once followed her name automatically. A private family corridor is an internal route used by household members, working royals, residents, and guests, cleared in advance, and it matters because it separates public royal spaces from the family's protected living world. Staff hesitated. Not loudly, not rudely, but enough. A young aide quietly asked Meghan to wait while permission was checked, and that tiny delay cut deeper than anyone expected. Meghan felt exposed in a room where silence could travel faster than speech. Harry sensed the embarrassment before she said a word. He saw how quickly a small procedural pause became something sharper, something personal. To Meghan, the aide's hesitation did not feel like caution. It felt like a deliberate reminder that her place had changed. She had once walked through royal spaces as a duchess, welcomed into the center of palace life. Now she was being held at the edge of a hallway, waiting for someone else to decide whether she still belonged. That was the cruelty of it. Success had brought her inside the monarchy, but suffering had taught her how quickly the same institution could turn warmth into control. William heard about the corridor request later that night, and his reaction was immediate. The prince became still, not because he wanted conflict, but because he recognized a danger that had been building beneath every uneasy exchange. To him, informal courtesy was being mistaken for permanent entitlement. A palace memo from that evening was then placed inside a locked residence file, recording the corridor request as the point where future access needed review. A residence file is an internal record used to track decisions affecting private royal spaces. And this one mattered because it turned an awkward moment into lasting evidence. Harry confronted William privately afterward, still angry over Meghan's embarrassment, and determined to force a human answer from a system that had already begun closing ranks. The brothers argued in low, painful words, circling the same wound from opposite sides. Harry saw rejection. William saw risk. Harry demanded understanding. William demanded clarity, and when the conversation finally reached its coldest point, the prince gave the answer that would echo through everything that followed. Then we need clearer rules. Those clearer rules now arrived as a cancellation order, no longer hidden in memory, no longer softened by family silence. Meghan had been wounded by the hesitation that night, but now she faced something far harder. The proof that William had remembered it, recorded it, and acted on it. The past has finally become paperwork, and paperwork is about to become a confrontation no one inside Windsor can ignore. When Meghan finally stands before William, the room is quiet enough for every breath to feel like evidence. No cameras, no public smiles, no carefully staged family unity, just two people divided by history, pride, and a locked royal door. She wants an explanation. He wants a boundary respected. And between them sits the document that turned private pain into official reality. Meghan had requested the private meeting because silence had become unbearable. Her residence access had already been cancelled, her name had already been entered as removed in the official register, and the palace had moved faster than any personal conversation could catch. The official register, a protected record used to confirm who may enter private royal spaces, mattered because it turned a family dispute into a system-backed decision. Once her name was removed there, staff did not need to wonder what the family felt. The answer had been written for them. William agreed to see her, but even that agreement carried a warning. The prince made it clear through his office that this was not a negotiation. It was one controlled conversation before the decision became impossible to soften. Meghan understood the meaning immediately. She was not being invited to plead her case as an equal. She was being given the courtesy of hearing why the door had already closed. That knowledge hurt more than the words on the page, because it showed her that Windsor had stopped treating her pain as urgent. Meghan placed the notice on the table and asked the question that had been burning through her since the first line. Why was she not told before her name was removed? Her voice carried anger, but beneath it sat something more fragile. The shame of imagining others knowing before she did. William did not rush to answer. He chose each word with care, saying access to private residences depended on trust, role, and current responsibility. Private residences, the protected living areas used by the royal family away from public duty, mattered because they were not symbols alone. They were the spaces where the monarchy guarded its future from confusion, pressure, and intrusion. Meghan heard the explanation, but she also heard the judgment beneath it. She asked whether Catherine had supported the move, and William's silence became heavier than any answer he could have spoken. Catherine's household had been mentioned before, softly but unmistakably, and now that quiet presence filled the room. The princess had not needed to confront Meghan directly. William's decision had done the speaking for her, and that made the silence feel even colder. Harry entered midway, carrying the anger Meghan had been forced to hold alone. He challenged William, demanding to know when caution became cruelty and when a brother decided to turn family hurt into palace law. William refused to let the moment become emotional bargaining. The prince pushed the document back across the table and said the decision stood. Not because the wound was small, but because the boundary was final. Then William stood. He set his pen down with a calm that felt almost brutal, and revealed the truth Meghan had not expected. The cancellation was backed not only by his judgment, but by residence protocol, security authority, and the accepted silence of the king. In that instant, anger was no longer enough. Meghan had come to face one man, but she had found the weight of the crown behind him. Because behind William's calm words lies a machinery of royal control that Meghan cannot overturn with anger alone. The palace does not always move loudly. Sometimes power appears as a changed code, a removed name, a staff instruction whispered before dawn. Meghan's shock grows when she realizes William's decision is not symbolic theater. It is backed by residence protocol, security authority, and the future king's determination to separate family feeling from royal access once and for all. William's order moved through Windsor with the silence of something already decided. It did not need a speech to become powerful. It needed systems, signatures, and obedience. Windsor residence access was a layered privilege, a combination of security clearance, household status, and permission to enter private family spaces without being treated as a visiting outsider. That mattered because the monarchy did not protect its most private rooms through emotion. It protected them through records. And once Meghan's name was removed from those records, sympathy could no longer unlock what authority had closed. Charles understood that more deeply than anyone. The king read the revised access list in silence, then removed his glasses as if the page had become too heavy to look at. An access list is the internal record showing who may enter restricted royal spaces. And this one mattered because it no longer treated Meghan as someone with standing permission. Charles knew what that meant for Harry. He knew what it would do to Meghan. But he also knew what it meant for William to lead on a matter tied to future household protection. The monarch could have intervened. He could have softened the blow. Instead, he allowed the prince's authority to stand, and that silence became its own approval. Camilla noticed the cost on Charles's face before he spoke. She asked quietly whether the move would provoke another family storm, and the king answered with a truth neither of them could escape. The storm had already begun. The queen consort understood palace damage. She knew how one private decision could become a public wound, and how one wounded person could pull the entire crown back into old battles. But even Camilla could see that this was not only about Meghan's reaction. It was about whether Windsor would remain a family home with flexible courtesies, or become a protected royal center governed by hard lines. William had chosen the hard line. The access board, the internal system used to confirm and update entry permissions, did more than remove Meghan's former privileges. It blocked informal staff overrides, the quiet exceptions that once allowed an aide, guard, or household officer to smooth an awkward situation with a discreet approval. That change was the true revelation. Meghan had not simply been taken off a list. The old back doors of courtesy had been sealed behind her. A senior courtier confirmed in a documented household account that no aide could restore her access without William's written approval, and that detail turned the decision from painful into absolute. Meghan would soon feel the force of that absoluteness. Until now, part of her could still imagine that someone inside the palace might quietly correct the insult, that a sympathetic aide might make a call, that Charles might step in, that Harry's anger might bend the system back toward mercy. But the machinery had already moved beyond emotion. William's signature sat behind every instruction. Charles's silence sat behind William. Camilla's fear sat beside the king. And Meghan's name, once connected to the private paths of Windsor, now carried a restriction no apology could erase. The order has left the room, reached the gates, and begun changing Meghan's reality in ways no one can soften. The true weight of William's order is felt not in a meeting, but at a threshold. Meghan arrives expecting discretion, perhaps even a quiet correction. Instead, the system answers before any person does. A gate procedure changes. A staff member hesitates. A familiar royal route becomes unreachable. And in that instant, the cancellation stops being paperwork and becomes humiliation. Meghan had believed there might still be a way to soften what had happened. A planned private Windsor visit should have been simple, at least in theory, because the palace had always known how to hide discomfort behind procedure. But when she attempted to confirm her access, the answer came back with devastating calm. Her former residence clearance no longer appeared in the active system. Residence clearance means official permission to enter protected living areas connected to the royal household. And it mattered, because without it, Meghan was no longer treated as someone with an automatic place inside Windsor's private world. She was treated as a visitor waiting for approval. Harry felt the insult almost before Meghan spoke. He had seen palace language used like velvet over steel, soft enough to sound polite, sharp enough to cut deeply. Staff were now instructed to treat Meghan as an external guest, requiring formal approval, not as someone with standing private entry privileges. That distinction mattered because it changed everything. It meant her arrival needed permission. It meant her movement required review. It meant the door that once opened through family connection now stood behind William's authority. For Meghan, the humiliation was not only that access had been removed, it was that the palace had already learned how to enforce it. Meghan stood beside the reception desk, trying to hold herself steady as the staff member searched the active list. The pause was brief, but it felt endless. Then came the sentence that made the order real. "I'm sorry, that access is no longer listed." Her face tightened, not with surprise now, but with the pain of confirmation. Harry reacted with open frustration, asking how quickly the palace had moved to enforce a decision against his wife. He wanted someone to admit that this was personal. He wanted a name, a reason, a crack in the polished wall. But the staff member had only instructions, and instructions do not comfort the wounded. Then the sealed envelope arrived. Meghan took it with the careful stillness of someone expecting another blow, and that instinct was right. The letter confirmed that even temporary residence entry now required direct written clearance. Temporary residence entry, a short-term approval for someone to enter private royal spaces without permanent access, mattered because it was often the last soft path left when formal standing had been removed. But even that path had narrowed. The second note was colder still. Any request involving family apartments had to be reviewed through William's office. Harry understood what that meant, and Meghan did too. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an overzealous guard or a cautious aide. William's signature had followed them all the way to the threshold, turning a private family wound into a lived reality. Meghan had imagined one last channel might remain open, one quiet route through Charles, one human exception through an old palace contact. Instead, every road now curved back to the same place, the prince who had signed the order. But just as Meghan began to believe every channel was closing, the conflict shifted in a direction no one expected. Anger had carried Harry this far, but anger alone could not undo what Windsor had already accepted. To reach the heart of the decision, he would have to face William not through staff, not through paperwork, not through wounded pride, but as a brother standing before another brother with no shield left between them. After the public sting of denial, the story narrows to two people speaking without aides, titles, or escape. The loudest royal moments are not always the most important ones. After the confrontation, after the gate procedure, after the shock of being officially blocked, Harry finds William alone. No aides stand between them. No statements are drafted. The brothers face each other not as public symbols, but as wounded men, carrying different versions of the same family pain. Harry asked for the conversation because the official channels had only made the wound deeper. Staff instructions had spoken for William. Security systems had repeated William's authority. The sealed envelope had turned Meghan's humiliation into procedure. But Harry needed more than procedure. He needed to hear his brother say why this had happened, not through a courtier, not through a register, and not through the cold language of palace control. A private conversation, meaning a direct exchange without aides or formal advisors, mattered because it stripped away the machinery that had protected both men from saying what they truly felt. For once, no one could translate the pain into policy. William agreed because he knew the order had become more than an order. It had entered the most fragile place between them. The prince could defend the decision in official terms, but he could not pretend the emotional damage was distant. Harry stood before him carrying Meghan's shame and his own anger, while William carried the burden of a future he believed could not survive blurred boundaries. The crown, the institution of monarchy passed through generations of sovereign authority, mattered here because it was no longer an idea floating above them. It had become the reason one brother had wounded another. Harry spoke first, and his voice stayed low because rage had moved past shouting. He accused William of humiliating Meghan, of allowing staff to enforce a decision before she had been given the dignity of a warning, of turning a family argument into a royal verdict. William listened without interruption. That silence did not soften Harry. It made him push harder. He asked when protection became punishment. He asked when the prince had decided Meghan no longer deserved even the courtesy of being told before her name disappeared. Every question carried years of resentment, and every pause between them felt like an old fracture reopening. William finally answered with painful restraint. He said he was not punishing Meghan. He was protecting spaces that belonged to duty, children, and the future stability of the monarchy. He reminded Harry that Windsor's private areas were not emotional prizes to be claimed when relationships became complicated. They were protected family spaces tied to responsibility, security, and trust. Then came the revelation Harry had not wanted to hear. William had not acted in rage. He had acted after months of recorded concerns, staff warnings, and the unresolved reception incident that had been placed in a locked file long before the cancellation order was signed. Harry felt the ground shift beneath his anger. Rage was easier when William looked cruel. It was harder when the decision appeared planned, documented, and painfully deliberate. William admitted the hardest part was signing a paper he knew would hurt his brother, but he said avoiding it would have weakened the monarchy's boundaries. That confession did not heal anything. It simply made the truth unavoidable. Harry had arrived believing he might force a reversal. He left understanding that William had already paid the emotional price of saying no. And beyond Windsor, the story was no longer waiting politely behind closed doors. The first whispers had escaped. The first headlines were forming. Meghan's blocked access was becoming something larger than one family's private fracture. It was becoming a symbol the public could understand instantly. A door closed. A privilege withdrawn. A brother choosing the crown over the wound in front of him. What began as a private access decision now becomes a national symbol, and the public reads it with ruthless clarity. By morning, the story is no longer contained by palace walls. The image is simple and devastating. Meghan, once welcomed into royal residences, now facing a Windsor door controlled by William's office. Across Britain, the decision becomes more than family discipline. It becomes a referendum on belonging, consequence, and whether royal privilege can survive after royal duty has been left behind. Meghan saw the first headlines before anyone could prepare her for the cruelty of how final they sounded. The words did not carry the softness of palace language. They carried judgment. Palace communications had confirmed that Windsor residence access had been updated under internal household authority, offering no emotional explanation and no personal defense. Internal household authority means the power held by royal offices to manage private residence rules, staff instructions, and access permissions without turning every decision into a public royal statement. That mattered because the palace had not denied the removal. It had simply wrapped it in procedure and let the world understand the rest. The public understood it quickly. Updated access did not feel like a minor adjustment. It sounded like a formal removal of Meghan's private Windsor privileges. And that single phrase spread faster than any careful clarification could contain. Meghan sat motionless as the coverage hardened around her name. She was wounded not only by William's decision, but by how cleanly the outside world now saw it. Yesterday, the cancellation had been a private humiliation. Today, it had become a national verdict. The woman once presented as part of the monarchy's modern future was now being discussed as someone standing outside its protected door. William watched the same coverage without triumph. The prince had wanted clarity, but clarity had reopened every fracture he knew the family had tried to bury. He understood that the order would be judged as cold, maybe even ruthless. Yet he also knew the alternative would have left Windsor's boundaries open to endless emotional pressure. Royal privilege, the special access and status granted through connection to the crown, mattered because it had always depended on duty in return. That was the question the public seized upon. Could someone keep private royal access after stepping away from the role that once justified it? Then came the moment that captured everything. Outside Windsor Castle's Henry VI's gate, a crowd gathered while a broadcaster held up a palace map and pointed toward the private residence wing at the center of the controversy. Henry VI Gate, one of Windsor's famous public-facing entrances, mattered because it became the place where private family rules collided with national attention. People did not need every detail to understand the symbolism. A door had closed. A name had vanished. A brother had enforced the boundary. One front page made the wound impossible to ignore. Beneath the stark headline, "The Access Line," it showed a dark Windsor doorway that turned an internal register change into a national image. Meghan felt the force of that image. Harry felt the anger rising again. William felt the cost of being understood and condemned at the same time. Yet beneath the noise, the final meaning of the decision began to settle inside the family with painful certainty. The world may debate the order, but the emotional verdict belongs to the people who lost something behind Windsor's closed door. In the end, William's decision did not merely cancel Meghan's access. It declared that royal closeness could no longer exist without royal responsibility. The door at Windsor became the symbol of everything unresolved. Affection turned into distance, history turned into procedure, and family memory turned into a boundary. For Meghan, it was rejection. For William, it was protection. For the monarchy, it was a turning point. Meghan folded the notice slowly, not because the pain had faded, but because fighting the paper no longer changed what it meant. Her official Windsor residence access had settled into palace life as a permanent line, not a temporary dispute waiting to be softened by emotion. Windsor residence access means the formal permission allowing someone to enter private living areas connected to the royal household. And it mattered, because it was never just about movement through a building. It was about trust, status, and the quiet recognition that someone still belonged close to the family's inner world. Meghan understood that now. Her name had not simply been paused, it had been removed from that world. Harry stood beside her in silence, and that silence carried the defeat anger could not admit. He had challenged William, questioned the palace, and searched for a weak point in the order. But the door remained closed. The prince had used authority, not temper, and that made the decision harder to break. Harry knew William had drawn a line that staff could follow, family offices could respect, and security teams could enforce without hesitation. Family offices are the private teams that manage the daily work, schedules, and household matters of senior royals. And their acceptance mattered because it turned one signature into a new working reality across Windsor. Charles did not reverse the order. The king's inaction became the final confirmation that William's judgment now carried decisive weight inside the family structure. He could have reopened the matter. He could have asked for delay, review, or mercy. Instead, Charles allowed the decision to stand, and by doing so, he showed that the monarchy was shifting toward the future king's control. That shift hurt Meghan. It wounded Harry. But it also gave the palace what it had been seeking for months: clarity without apology. William signed the final residence confirmation without celebration. The final residence confirmation, a closing document that confirms access rules and makes them operational, mattered because it ended the last space for confusion. The prince knew the monarchy had gained a boundary, but he also knew the cost. A brother had been hurt. Meghan had been severed from the last private symbol of royal belonging. And Windsor, once the place where family memory softened old pain, had become the place where sentiment lost to duty. The verdict was final. Meghan's access was not just cancelled, her remaining claim to private royal belonging was officially severed. Harry could stand with her, but he could not reopen what William had closed. Charles could feel the sadness of it, but he did not undo the future king's command. And the monarchy, cold yet clear, chose boundaries over emotion. And with that final signature, the royal family did not simply close a door on Meghan. It revealed the price of belonging to the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.